My brother stood at the head of my father's birthday table, glass raised, smile wide, and introduced me to his business partner as the one who never quite figured it out. He laughed when he said it. My mother laughed. My father looked down at his plate and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. His business partner didn't laugh. He just looked at me, and something shifted behind his eyes, quiet, unreadable, and he set down his glass very slowly. I didn't know then what that look meant. I would, by the end of the night. My brother is 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, the air in our family tilted toward him. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would admit if you named it out loud. It was more like, if our family were a table, one leg was always slightly longer on his side. Everything rolled his direction naturally. You'd almost think it was gravity. He was charming. That was the word people always used. Charming and ambitious and so full of ideas. My mother would say this, the way other mothers say their child is gifted at piano, as though the ideas themselves were the achievement, regardless of what became of them. Growing up, I learned to work quietly. I did my homework at the kitchen table while he talked on the phone in the living room, already networking at 17, already performing the life he intended to have. I got good grades. I got a scholarship. I moved to Chicago at 22 with 2 suitcases and a job offer from a mid-sized financial consulting firm. My brother got a loan from my parents, a substantial one, which they told me was an investment in the family's future, and opened a consulting business of his own. I told myself this was fine. Families do things differently. Money flows where it flows. I was independent. I didn't need it. What I needed, I built myself, and I built it carefully. By the time I was 29, I had worked my way up to senior analyst. I was good at what I did, not in the way that requires announcement, but in the way that makes people come back. I had a small apartment I genuinely loved, 2 plants I'd managed not to kill, and a reputation for the kind of financial modeling that made CFOs look competent in front of their boards. I called home on Sundays. I visited on holidays. I smiled at the right moments and let the wrong ones pass, because some battles aren't worth the blood on the carpet. But there was one thing I had started keeping track of. It wasn't intentional at first. It began with a spreadsheet. I build spreadsheets, where I logged the professional inquiries I passed along to my brother's firm. Referrals from my own network. A contact here, a warm introduction there. He'd ask, and I'd give, because he was my brother, and I thought it meant something to be generous to people you love, even when the love is complicated. The spreadsheet grew longer than I'd realized. 14 referrals over 3 years. 4 of them had converted to contracts I'd later found out about, which he never mentioned, never acknowledged, and certainly never shared credit for. One of those contracts, I discovered through a mutual connection, had been worth nearly $80,000 to his firm. He sent me a fruit basket that Christmas. Fancy, pears. I kept the spreadsheet. I kept the emails. I kept the screenshots of the LinkedIn posts where he announced new clients. Clients I recognized, clients who'd reached me first and said things like, built through hard work and strategic relationship building. I wasn't planning anything. I was just keeping records the way you keep a spare key, just in case. My father turned 62 in October, and my mother planned a dinner at Harrington's, the kind of restaurant that has white tablecloths and a sommelier who doesn't ask if you know what you're looking for. It was a Saturday. The weather had turned cold that week, the first real cold of the season, and the city felt sharp and serious when I took the train in from my neighborhood. I wore a dress I liked. Dark blue, simple. I did my hair. I took a cab from the station because my heels weren't made for pavement. I arrived and my mother kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired. My father hugged me and told me it was good I made it. My brother was already there, already holding court at the table, and he stood when I walked in and said, "Finally, the little sister arrives." And everyone smiled as though this were warmth rather than what it actually was. His business partner was seated to his left. I didn't know who he was when I sat down. I knew he was important. My brother had been working this partnership for months. I'd gathered as much from the fragments my mother dropped during our Sunday calls, breathless with reflected pride. someone with capital, someone with connections, someone who was going to, in my brother's words, take things to the next level. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, quiet in the way that confident people sometimes are, like they've stopped needing to fill every silence. He introduced himself to me with his first name, Warren, and we shook hands across the table. My brother watched this introduction the way a person watches someone else hold something fragile. Dinner was pleasant in the surface way that family dinners can be. The food was excellent. My father ordered the sea bass and ate it happily. My mother asked Warren what brought him to Chicago originally, and he said work, and she said, "Wasn't that always the way?" And everyone laughed. I ate my salad and answered questions when they were directed at me and let the conversation move around me like water. This was a skill I'd developed over many years. You become, in families like mine, very good at being present and invisible simultaneously. And then my brother raised his glass. He was toasting my father. He said things about legacy, about what it meant to watch a man build something with his own hands, about how it shaped his own ambition. My mother was already tearing up slightly. My father looked pleased, and then my brother said, "I want to introduce Warren properly to everyone here, because he's going to be a big part of what comes next for the business, and I want him to understand the family he's partnering with." He looked at my mother, he looked at my father, and then he looked at me. "That's my little sister," he said, still smiling. "She works in finance. She's done fine." A small pause, perfectly timed. "She's the one who never really took any risks, though. Played it very safe, very steady. Nothing wrong with that. Some people are built for the background." He lifted his glass higher. "But the men of vision in this family," and he looked at my father and then at Warren, and the implication was a complete sentence, "are built different." My mother smiled. My father said, "Here, here," and raised his own glass. I sat very still. I've thought about that moment a lot since then. I wasn't angry in the way you might expect, the hot, immediate, reactive kind. It was something colder than anger, something observational. I noticed the way Warren hadn't raised his glass yet. I noticed the small movement of his jaw. I noticed that he was looking at my brother with the expression of someone recalibrating. I picked up my water glass. I said nothing. I waited. Warren asked, maybe 20 minutes later, what firm I worked with. I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the name of the firm, said it again as though testing it. And he asked if I knew a woman named Patricia in their M&A division. I said I did. He said she had spoken highly of my work last spring at a conference in Boston. He said she'd specifically mentioned an analysis I'd done on a mid-market restructuring. And he named the company, which was a company I had worked on and which I hadn't mentioned to anyone outside professional circles. And he said it had been the clearest risk modeling he'd seen on a deal that size. The table went quiet. Not the whole table. My father was still talking to the sommelier, but in our corner of it, between me and Warren and my brother, who had stopped mid-sentence, the quiet was complete. My brother said, "Warren does know the industry, obviously," and he laughed in a way that was trying to recover something. Warren looked at my brother, then he looked back at me. He said, "You're the one Tara referred to me last year." I said I wasn't sure, that I met a lot of people at conferences. He said Tara had described me specifically. Mid-height, dark hair. Said you were the kind of analyst who made everyone else in the room feel like they'd been sloppy. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that wasn't for the room, it was for me. "I've been trying to figure out who you were since February." My brother said, "Well, small world." Warren said, "I've been looking at your firm's portfolio for a possible engagement, actually. Have been for a few months." He paused. "You've worked on the Meridian restructuring?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And the Callaway Vance acquisition?" I said, "Yes." He looked at my brother with something that was not quite an expression, and then he said, very calmly, "You told me in August that your firm had consulted on Callaway Vance." The table went fully quiet, even my father. My brother said, I meant we had tracked it closely as a case study." Warren said, "You told me you'd led the analysis. This is the part I hadn't planned. I want to be clear about that. I hadn't come to my father's birthday dinner with any intention of what happened next. I had my spreadsheet, yes. I had my records. But I had them the way you have a fire extinguisher. Not because you're expecting fire, but because you understand the world contains it. Warren pulled out his phone. He had a habit of this, I would later learn. He didn't take notes in the traditional sense. He recorded voice memos and had them transcribed. He pulled up something and read from it, quietly but clearly, a summary of what my brother had told him in August about his own professional history. It wasn't accurate, not in small ways, in significant ones. My brother said the summary was taken out of context. His voice had the particular quality of someone building a bridge over water that isn't there. My mother said, "This feels like work talk at a birthday dinner." Warren said, "I apologize. You're right." He put his phone away. He looked at my father and said, "Happy birthday, sir." The sea base looked excellent, and he smiled, and the moment passed, or appeared to. After dinner, in the small window of time when my father was accepting his dessert and my mother was in the restroom, Warren came and stood beside me near the window that looked out over the street. He said, "I have some questions I'd like to ask you, professionally." I said I was listening. He said, "How long have you been at your firm?" I said 7 years. He said, "Are you happy there?" I thought about that for longer than was probably polite. I said, "I'm well compensated and I'm good at what I do." He said, "That's a very precise non-answer." I said, "I know." He took a card from his jacket pocket. It was a simple card. Name, number, one line of text that described his firm. He said, "I'd like to continue this conversation. Not here. Somewhere we can talk properly." I took the card. I put it in my bag. And then my brother appeared at my elbow, smiling the particular smile that means he's nervous, and said, "Warren, I've been wanting to go over the Q4 projections." Warren said, "Tomorrow. Come to the office at 9. My brother said, "Of course, of course." I found out the rest in pieces, the way you usually find out the things that matter. My brother went to that meeting. I know because he called me 2 days later and his voice was different. Smaller, with the air taken out of it. And he said that Warren had dissolved the partnership before it officially began. He said there had been a misalignment of expectations. He said Warren had done his own due diligence and some things hadn't checked out. He did not say what things. He did not apologize for what he'd said at dinner. What he said was, "Did you say something to him before dinner?" I said I had never met Warren before that night. He said, it felt like he already knew about you, like someone had." I said, "He knew about me because I do good work, and people in this industry talk to each other. That's how it works." There was a silence. He said, "Right. And then, things have been tight. This deal was going to change a lot." I said, "I know." And I meant it, because I did know, and I wasn't glad he was struggling. I want to be clear about that too. There is no version of this story where I felt triumphant. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been walking slightly uphill for a very long time. I said, "I referred you 14 clients in 3 years. 4 of them turned into contracts. I know because I tracked them." I let that land. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you so you understand that the way you see me and the reality of who I am are not the same thing, and the people worth working with can see the difference. He didn't say anything for a long moment. I said, "Take care of yourself." And I hung up. I called my parents on Sunday as usual. My mother said dinner had been wonderful. She said it was a shame about my brother's business thing not working out. She said, "Some opportunities just aren't meant to be." I said, "Yes." She said, "Warren seems quite taken with you, by the way." I said, "He was kind." She said, "Your father thought so too." He said after, "You seem different, more present." I thought about this. I said, "I've always been present, Mom. You just weren't always looking." She was quiet for a moment. Not an uncomfortable quiet, something softer than that. She said, "I know." She didn't say more than that. But she didn't change the subject either. She let it sit there between us, 2 words, and I thought maybe that was the beginning of something. Or maybe it wasn't. Some shifts happen in years, not sentences. I've learned to be patient with the things I can't control. I met with Warren the following Thursday. His office was on the 31st floor of a building in the West Loop, all glass and gray, with a view of the city that looked, on a clear day, like someone had arranged the skyline specifically for the purpose of perspective. We talked for 2 hours. He asked me questions about the way I approached risk analysis, about the methodologies I preferred, about how I thought about the difference between modeling for probability and modeling for possibility. I talked to him the way I never got to talk at my family's table, as though the things I thought were worth hearing. At the end of the meeting, he asked if I'd be interested in consulting on a project. A real project, substantive, with a fee I won't put a number to, but which was, by any reasonable measure, significant. I said yes. We shook hands. In the elevator going down, I looked at my reflection in the mirrored doors, and I thought about the woman my brother had described at that dinner table, the one built for the background, the one who never took risks, the one who played it safe. I thought he was describing someone he needed me to be, not someone I was. I moved to a bigger apartment in January, not dramatically bigger, one extra room, which I use for a home office now, where I keep my files and my second monitor and the 2 plants I still haven't killed. I worked on Warren's project through the winter, and it led to another, and then a referral to a firm I'd been watching for 2 years. My brother and I don't talk often. When we do, he's cordial. There are no apologies. I've stopped expecting them, not because I gave up, but because I understood that what I needed from him was never actually an apology. What I needed was for him to not have that power over me anymore. And somewhere between the birthday dinner and the phone call and the Thursday meeting on the 31st floor, that particular power ran out. My mother calls every Sunday. She asks about my work more now. She doesn't always understand it, but she asks, and she listens, and that is more than it used to be. My father told her to pass along that he was proud of me. She told me this on a Sunday in February, almost too casually, like it was any other news. I was at my kitchen table drinking coffee, and I had to put the mug down. I didn't cry, but I sat there for a while. Some things take a long time to arrive. You can spend years standing at the door waiting, and then one Sunday morning in February, while the city is still gray with cold, and the light hasn't fully come yet, it knocks. You don't have to throw the door open. You can just stand there for a minute. You can just let yourself feel it.